The alarm clock didn't wake Izuku Midoriya. He was already awake, lying perfectly still in the dim, pre-dawn light of his bedroom, listening to the rhythmic, shallow sound of his own breathing. Every morning started like this, a conscious, calculated assessment of his own body. He catalogued his internal temperature. He checked the moisture in his throat, the beat of his heart, the feeling in his fingertips. He closed his eyes and reached inward, feeling for the familiar, terrifying hum of his quirk. It was always there, a bubbling, microscopic cauldron resting just beneath his skin, dormant but infinitely restless. He took a deep breath, visualizing the biological locks he had mentally placed on his own cells, ensuring they were tight. Only then did he throw off the covers. Izuku swung his legs over the edge of the bed and went straight to his desk, snapping on a small, sterile-looking desk lamp. He didn't reach for a video game or a comic book. He reached for a thermometer and a pulse oximeter. He placed the thermometer under his tongue and clipped the plastic monitor to his index finger. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. 99% oxygen saturation. Heart rate, 65 BPM. Normal. Safe. Izuku let out a long exhale, the tension bleeding from his narrow shoulders. He recorded the numbers in a small, black notebook titled Vital Suppressions, Volume 12. Next to the numbers, he wrote a single word, contained. He walked to his closet and began his daily ritual of armor. First came the long-sleeved, high-necked undershirt, meant to cover as much skin as possible. Then came the standard black uniform of Aldera Junior High, buttoned up to the very top. He pulled a pair of thin, black, nitro gloves from a dispenser on his wall and snapped them over his hands, ensuring the cuffs of his jacket overlapped the rubber. Finally, he picked up a black, medical-grade N95 mask and looped the straps over his ears, adjusting the wire bridge over his nose until the seal was airtight. He caught his reflection in the mirror. He didn't look like a 15-year-old boy dreaming of becoming a hero. He looked like a quarantine patient. He looked like a biohazard. In this world, 80% of the population possessed a superpower, a unique genetic trait known as a quirk. Society had adapted, commercialized, and glorified these powers. The strongest, flashiest, and most heroic individuals became pro-heroes, celebrated on billboards and television screens. They were the idols of the modern age. But there was a darker side to the genetic revolution, a history that hero society preferred to sweep under the rug. Before the term quirk was coined by marketing executives and government officials to make powers sound quirky and manageable, there was the X gene. The mutants. Those whose powers manifested not as simple fire-breathing or minor telekinesis, but as radical, uncontrollable, or deeply terrifying biological anomalies. While quirks were celebrated, mutations were feared. Mutants were pushed to the fringes of society, hunted by extremist hate groups, and subjected to harsh government regulations. The line between a quirk and a mutation was theoretically arbitrary, but socially, it was a matter of life and death. If your power was useful, you had a quirk. If your power made people uncomfortable, altered your body grotesquely, or posed a mass threat, you were labeled a mutant. Izuku Midoriya lived right on the razor's edge of that terrifying divide. His quirk was officially registered as pathogen. His body was a living, breathing bioreactor capable of generating, manipulating, and mutating viral structures. At a cellular level, he could alter the DNA and RNA of viruses, manufacturing strains with wildly different effects. In a perfectly rational world, he could have been seen as a medical miracle. He had spent years secretly studying virology, dreaming of creating bacteriophages that could hunt down cancer cells, or regenerative retroviruses that could heal fatal wounds in seconds. But humans were not rational creatures. When a 4-year-old Izuku first manifested his quirk at a playground, he hadn't known how to control it. A localized outbreak of a severe, fever-inducing flu had swept through the park. 3 children had been hospitalized. The authorities had descended on the Midoriya apartment in hazmat suits. Since that day, Izuku had been branded. He wasn't a hero in the making. He was a walking plague. Izuku? Are you awake, honey? The timid, soft voice of his mother broke through his thoughts. Izuku turned from the mirror, grabbing his yellow backpack. He opened his bedroom door to find Inko Midoriya hovering in the hallway, wringing her hands together. She looked tired. She always looked tired. The stress of raising a child who could accidentally wipe out a city block with a sneeze had aged her prematurely. "Morning, Ma," Mizuka said, his voice muffled by the thick mask. Did you check your temperature?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously to his gloved hands. She hated herself for the fear she felt. Izuku knew that, but she couldn't help it. Instinct was instinct. "Normal," Izuku said, trying to infuse a smile into his eyes since she couldn't see his mouth. "Everything is locked down. I feel completely fine." Inko let out a breath that sounded like a sob and reached out, tentatively placing a hand on his shoulder. It was the only physical contact they ever shared, and always through layers of clothing. Okay, good. I left your breakfast on the table. Eat quickly, you don't want to be late." Izuku nodded, walking past her into the kitchen. He ate alone, slipping his mask down just enough to take bites of his rice and fish, ever hypervigilant of the air leaving his lungs. When he finished, he washed his own dishes with scalding hot water and bleach, another rule they lived by, before heading for the front door. "Have a good day, Izuku," Inko called out from the living room. "Keep your head down. Keep your head down." It was her mantra. Don't be noticed. Don't draw attention. Don't let them see you. "I will, Ma," Mizuka replied, stepping out into the cool morning air and closing the door behind him. The walk to Aldera Junior High was an exercise in isolation. As Izuku walked down the crowded sidewalks, people naturally drifted away from him. It wasn't a conscious effort on their part, just an instinctual reaction to the boy in the surgical mask and gloves. He gave off an aura of sickness. Izuku didn't mind the space. It gave him time to think. He pulled out his hero analysis for the future notebook, flipping to a fresh page to document a fight he had seen on the news the night before. The hero Kamui Woods had captured a villain with tree-like restraints. Izuku furiously jotted down notes on the tensile strength of the wood, the speed of its growth, and its potential weaknesses. Studying other people's quirks was his only escape from the reality of his own. If he could just understand how heroes use their powers to save people, maybe he could figure out a way to do the same. Maybe he could be the first pro-hero who fought with microscopic weapons. But as the gates of Aldera Junior High loomed ahead, the fantasy crumbled, replaced by the grim reality of his daily existence. The classroom was already buzzing with loud, obnoxious energy when Izuku walked in. He kept his head down, just as his mother had instructed, making a beeline for his desk at the very back of the room, near the window. The desks around his were empty. They always were. The school administration called it a necessary precaution for student safety. The students called it the quarantine zone. No one sat within a 5-foot radius of Izuku Midoriya. He set his bag down and took his seat, staring out the window at the cherry blossoms drifting in the wind. "Well, look who it is." Patient Zero decided to show up. The voice cut through the chatter of the classroom like a serrated blade. Izuku froze, his shoulders tensing under his uniform. He slowly turned his head to see Katsuki Bakugo leaning against the doorframe, a cruel, mocking sneer plastered across his face. Katsuki Bakugo, the golden boy of Aldera. Blessed with a powerful explosion quirk, perfect grades, and a lethal amount of charisma. He was everything society wanted in a hero. He was loud, flashy, and destructive, but his destruction was bright and hot. It was clean. "Morning, Kaken," Izuku mumbled through his mask, instantly regretting it. Bakugo pushed off the doorframe and stalked down the aisle, the other students parting for him like the Red Sea. He stopped at the edge of the quarantine zone, his red eyes glaring down at Izuku with a mixture of disgust and genuine hostility. "Don't call me that, plague," Bakugo spat. Tiny sparks popped and crackled in the palms of his hands, a physical manifestation of his volatile temper. "What did I tell you about talking to me? Your breath is probably toxic. You're gonna infect the whole room just by existing." A few kids in the front row snickered, though most remained silent. Nobody crossed Bakugo. "I'm wearing my mask, Katsuki," Izuku said quietly, keeping his eyes on his desk. "My vitals are stable. I'm not shedding anything." "Oh, you're not shedding anything?" Bakugo mocked, slamming his hands onto the desk of the student sitting in front of Izuku's empty radius. The wood smoked slightly beneath his palms. "You think that rubber and cloth is gonna stop what's inside you? You're a walking biological weapon, Deku. You're a villain waiting to happen." The only reason they haven't locked you up in Tartarus is because you haven't managed to kill anyone yet. Izuku clenched his gloved hands in his lap. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they echoed the deepest, darkest fears in Izuku's own mind. What if he sneezed and accidentally released a lethal strain of meningitis? What if he scraped his knee and his blood synthesized a necrotic, flesh-eating bacteria? He was a monster trying to pretend he was a boy. I just want to be a hero, same as you, Izuku whispered, so softly he barely heard himself. Bakugo heard it. His eyes narrowed, and a terrifyingly calm expression washed over his face. He reached out, snatching Izuku's hero analysis notebook off the desk before Izuku could react. A hero? Bakugo said, holding the notebook up by its spine. You. Don't make me laugh. Heroes save people. They bring light. You're a disease, Deku. You rot things from the inside out. There's no such thing as a hero who makes people sick. With a swift, practiced motion, Bakugo clamped his hands over the notebook and ignited a massive explosion. The boom rattled the windows, and a cloud of gray smoke plumed into the air. When the smoke cleared, the notebook was nothing more than a charred, smoldering husk. Bakugo tossed it out the open window into a small koi pond below. Listen to me, Plague. Bakugo leaned in, stopping just short of Izuku's personal space, his breath smelling of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin. Don't you dare apply to UA. They don't take mutants. They don't take biohazards. If you even think about standing in the same exam room as me, I'll burn you to ash so thoroughly there won't be a single cell left to infect anyone. Got it? Izuku couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. His heart rate was spiking. Beneath his skin, he felt the familiar, terrifying shift in his biology. His immune system was responding to the stress, his quirk automatically trying to synthesize a defensive mechanism. He felt his internal temperature tick upward. No. Stop. Lock it down. Lock it down! Izuku mentally screamed at his own body. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing his breathing to slow, visualizing heavy steel doors slamming shut over the viral factories in his bone marrow. When he opened his eyes, Bakugo was walking away, laughing with his lackeys. The teacher entered the room a moment later, clapping his hands for attention, completely ignoring the smoke lingering over Izuku's desk. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of gray monotony. The teacher handed out career aptitude forms, remarking that since everyone was aiming for the hero track, they were a mere formality. Izuku stared at the paper, his pen hovering over the blank space for his intended high school. Yue High School. Department of Heroics. He wrote it down. Despite the fear, despite Bakugo, despite his own biology, he had to try. If he gave up, then he really was just a monster waiting for a cage. When the final bell rang, Izuku waited until the classroom was entirely empty before he stood up. He walked down to the courtyard, fished his ruined notebook out of the koi pond, and shoved it into his backpack. He didn't want to go home yet. He needed air. He needed space. He took the long way home, a route that led him under a massive, concrete overpass that spanned a small, stagnant river. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long, menacing shadows beneath the bridge. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and damp earth. Izuku walked slowly, his head down, kicking a pebble along the pavement. His mind was a storm of contradictory thoughts. A weapon is just a weapon. It's how you use it, he told himself. Poison can be medicine in the right dosage. Vaccines are just dead viruses. I can do this. I can be a hero. You're a disease, Deku, Bakugo's voice echoed back. You rot things from the inside out. Izuku let out a frustrated sigh, pulling his mask down to his chin for just a moment to take a real, unobstructed breath of air. That was his first mistake. A sudden, wet, squelching sound echoed through the tunnel. Izuku stopped, his blood running cold. He turned around slowly. Rising from a manhole cover a few yards away was a nightmare of fluid dynamics. It was a massive, shifting mountain of dark green sludge, bubbling and frothing with a sickening consistency. Two massive, bloodshot eyes floated within the muck, followed by a wide, jagged maw filled with crooked teeth. A medium-sized invisibility cloak, the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. You'll do nicely, kid. Just stand still. Izuku's legs refused to move. The fight-or-flight response had been triggered, but his brain was stuck in neutral. Before he could even raise his hands, the villain lunged. A wave of thick, foul-smelling sludge crashed over Izuku, knocking him to the concrete. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and before he could draw a breath, the sludge forced its way into his nose and mouth. "Don't struggle," the villain hissed, the sludge wrapping around Izuku's arms and legs, pinning him down. "It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then it's all over. Thanks for the body, kid. The heroes are right on my tail. I needed a meat shield." Panic, pure and unadulterated, exploded in Izuku's chest. He couldn't breathe. The sludge was thick, suffocating, burning his throat as it forced its way down his trachea. He clawed frantically at the muck covering his face, his fingernails tearing at the villain's liquid body. But it was like trying to grasp water. His lungs screamed for oxygen. His vision began to swim, black spots dancing in the periphery. He was dying. He was actually going to die in this dark, damp tunnel, and nobody would even know. No! The instinct to survive is the most powerful biological imperative in existence. As Izuku's brain registered imminent death, it bypassed his conscious restraints. The mental locks he had meticulously maintained for a decade shattered in a microsecond. His quirk didn't just activate, it violently erupted. The bioreactors in his cells kicked into maximum overdrive. Within milliseconds, his body analyzed the chemical composition of the sludge suffocating him. It wasn't entirely biological. It was highly acidic, semi-synthetic. His immune system demanded an immediate, overwhelming countermeasure. Izuku's skin flushed a deep, feverish red. The temperature of his body spiked from 98.6 to 105 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. From the pores of his skin, a dense, pale green mist began to violently hiss outward. It was a custom-synthesized pathogen, born of pure terror and adrenaline. An airborne, hyper-aggressive paralytic virus designed to attack the nervous system of any living organism in its immediate vicinity. It wasn't meant to kill, but it was meant to stop everything from moving. The effect was instantaneous. The sludge villain let out a gurgling shriek as the green mist permeated its liquid mass. What is this? My body, it's burning. It's freezing. I can't. The villain's fluid form suddenly crystallized, turning rigid and hard like cement drying in fast forward. The sludge holding Izuku's limbs snapped and crumbled as the villain was entirely paralyzed, frozen in a grotesque statue of agony. Izuku fell to his hands and knees, coughing violently, expelling vile mouthfuls of sludge onto the pavement. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, his eyes streaming with tears. I did it, Izuku wheezed, staring at his trembling hands. The green mist was still pouring from his skin, swirling around him like a toxic fog, pooling around the tunnel floor. He had stopped a villain, his quirk had saved his life. But as the adrenaline began to wane, the true horror of the situation crashed down upon him. The mist wasn't stopping. His heart was beating so fast he couldn't regain control of his cellular factories. The paralytic pathogen was spilling out of the tunnel, carried by the breeze into the open street just beyond the overpass. Stop, Izuku whispered, clutching his chest. Stop, please stop. He scrambled to pull his mask back up, but the straps had snapped in the struggle. Hey! Stop right there, villain! A booming voice echoed from the street. Izuku looked up in terror. 3 pro-heroes had arrived, hot on the trail of the sludge villain. It was Death Arms, a massive man with superhuman strength, Kamui Woods, the rising star, and Empty Lady, a giantess in her rookie year. They ran toward the tunnel, weapons drawn, ready for a fight. No! Stay back! Izuku screamed, his voice raw and ragged. Don't breathe it in. Stay away. But they didn't listen. They were heroes. They didn't run from danger. Death Arms was the first to cross the threshold into the green fog. He took a massive breath, ready to shout an order. Mid-sentence, his eyes rolled back into his head. The massive man stiffened like a board, his muscles locking up entirely. He tipped over like a felled redwood, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. Death Arms! Kamui Woods yelled, rushing forward to catch him. As soon as Kamui inhaled, his wooden armor cracked. He gasped, clutching his throat, his legs giving out instantly as total paralysis overtook him. Empty Lady stopped dead in her tracks just outside the tunnel, but the wind shifted, blowing a concentrated cloud of the pathogen directly into her face. She didn't even have time to grow. She collapsed onto her knees, then slumped forward, completely incapacitated. The street beyond the heroes descended into absolute pandemonium. Civilians who had gathered to watch the heroes suddenly began dropping in the streets, paralyzed, gasping for shallow breaths as the virus hijacked their nervous systems. Cars swerved and crashed into streetlights as drivers lost control of their limbs. It was a mass casualty event unfolding in seconds. Izuku stood in the center of the tunnel, the frozen sludge villain behind him, the fallen heroes in front of him. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it bordered on insanity. What have I done? He had created an outbreak. Sirens began to wail in the distance, a chaotic chorus of police and ambulances. Izuku backed away, his hands pulling at his own hair. He finally managed to force his heart rate down, using breathing techniques he had practiced for years. The green mist stopped seeping from his pores, but the damage was already done. The air was saturated. Tires screeched as 3 police cruisers and a specialized hazard containment unit slammed to a halt a safe distance away from the fog. Officers piled out, immediately donning heavy gas masks and aiming riot shotguns at the tunnel. "Freeze! Do not move!" An officer bellowed through a megaphone. Izuku took a trembling step forward, his hands raised in surrender. "I didn't mean to!" he cried, tears streaming down his face. "He attacked me. I couldn't breathe. I'm sorry, I'll fix them. I just need to synthesize an antigen. I just need a minute." "Get on the ground, villain!" the officer roared, stepping out of the cruiser, his shotgun leveled squarely at Izuku's chest. "You have deployed an unregistered, Class A biological weapon. You are under arrest for domestic terrorism, villain." Biological weapon, terrorism. The words echoed in Izuku's mind, drowning out the sirens, drowning out the pleas of the paralyzed civilians. Bakugo was right. The world didn't see a scared 15-year-old boy who had just defended his own life. They saw a monster. They saw a plague. If they arrested him, they would put him in a quirk suppression cell in Tartarus. They would lock him away in the dark, or worse, they would hand him over to the government scientists who treated mutants like lab rats. He would never see his mother again. He would never see the sky. Izuku looked at the paralyzed heroes. He knew his virus. The paralysis would wear off in 2 hours. They would be fine. They would live. But if he stayed, his life was over. Survival instinct, dark and terrible, flared up one last time. Izuku didn't drop to the ground. He turned, and he bolted. "He's running!" "Fire!" The deafening crack of a rubber bullet echoed through the tunnel. It missed Izuku by inches, shattering against the concrete wall. Izuku scrambled up the slick, slanted embankment of the river channel, his sneakers fighting for purchase. He clawed his way into a dense thicket of trees bordering the highway and ran. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. He ignored the burning in his lungs, the branches whipping across his face, the tears blinding his vision. He ran until the sirens faded into the distance, until the sun dipped completely below the horizon, plunging the city into darkness. Hours later, the adrenaline finally crashed. Izuku collapsed in a filthy, narrow alleyway somewhere in the industrial district of Mizurufu. He dragged himself behind a rusted dumpster, curling into a tight, trembling ball. It was cold. His uniform was torn, smelling of sewage and panic. He was a fugitive. A villain. Izuku buried his face in his knees and began to sob. The wet, gasping sounds echoed pitifully in the brick corridor. Everything he had ever worked for, every dream he had ever held on to, was ashes. He had proved everyone right. He was too dangerous to exist in normal society. He couldn't go home. They would be waiting for him. He couldn't go to the police. They would shoot him on sight. He was completely, utterly alone. "I don't think you're a villain, son." The voice was not spoken aloud. It echoed directly inside Izuku's skull. It was calm, incredibly gentle, and carried a warmth that Izuku hadn't felt in years. Izuku gasped, his head snapping up. He looked wildly around the dark alley, his quirk automatically flaring, ready to defend him. Who's there? I'm warning you, stay back. I'm sick. I'll hurt you. You won't hurt us, Izuku Midoriya. You are not a disease. You are just a frightened boy who needs a teacher. A soft, mechanical hum filled the alley. From the shadows near the street entrance, two figures emerged, illuminated by the flickering yellow light of a broken street lamp. The first was a tall, incredibly broad-shouldered man wearing a worn brown leather jacket over a white undershirt. He had wild, untamed hair that spiked on the sides, and a scowl that looked permanently etched into his rugged face. He was chewing on a thick, unlit cigar, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He exuded a primal, dangerous energy, yet he seemed completely unbothered by the fact that he was standing near a reported biohazard. The second figure was a bald man in a remarkably pristine blue suit, sitting in a sleek, high-tech wheelchair. His eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue, and they looked at Izuku not with fear or disgust, but with profound, heartbreaking empathy. Who are you? Izuku stammered, pressing his back harder against the brick wall. How do you know my name? Are you heroes? Are you here to arrest me? The man in the leather jacket let out a short, gruff scoff. We ain't cops, kid. And we sure as hell ain't those corporate sellouts you call heroes in this country. The man in the wheelchair raised a hand, silencing his companion. He rolled forward, stopping just a few feet away from Izuku. He was well within the kill zone of Izuku's pathogen range, but he didn't even flinch. My name is Professor Charles Xavier, the man said aloud, his voice rich and commanding, yet endlessly kind. And this is my colleague, Logan. We have traveled a very long way to find you, Izuku. Izuku stared at them, his chest heaving. Find me? Why? You don't understand, you need to get away from me. My quirk, it's a pathogen. It's a virus. I hurt people. I paralyzed half a city block. You stopped a villain who was trying to kill you, Logan rumbled, taking the cigar out of his mouth and pointing it at Izuku. Your body did what it had to do to survive. It was messy, sure, but you didn't kill anyone. You're a kid who got handed a loaded gun and was never taught how to put the safety on. Your society views your power as a curse, Izuku, Xavier said softly, leaning forward in his chair. They call you a mutant. A biohazard. They look at your genetic gifts and see only the potential for destruction, because they do not have the patience or the courage to understand it. Izuku's breath hitched. Mutant. The word they used to hurt him. But this man didn't say it like an insult. He said it like a medical fact, like a point of pride. I have spent my life building a sanctuary for young people just like you, Xavier continued, his blue eyes locking onto Izuku's tear-stained face. A place where those who are feared and hated by the world can learn to understand their gifts in a safe, controlled environment. A school, Izuku. Izuku blinked, his mind struggling to process the information. A school? For people with dangerous quirks. For mutants, Logan corrected him, his eyes narrowing. Forget the sanitized words they use here. You've got the X gene, kid. You're one of us. Izuku looked down at his gloved hands. I can't. You don't know what I am. If you lose control, I have a healing factor that can regenerate from a single drop of blood, Logan said bluntly. Your viruses can't do a damn thing to me, and the professor here can shut your brain down before you even synthesize a sneeze. You ain't a threat to us, kid. Izuku looked back up, the words hitting him like a physical blow. They weren't afraid of him. For the first time in his entire life, someone was looking at his quirk, understanding exactly how deadly it was, and they weren't backing away. You have a brilliant mind, Izuku, Xavier said, tapping his temple. I have felt your thoughts. I know your knowledge of virology, your dreams of creating cures, your desperate, beautiful desire to be a hero who saves people. You are not a villain. You are a young man with a profound gift, trapped in a world that is too small-minded to see your potential. Xavier extended a hand toward the filthy, trembling boy in the alley. Come with us, Izuku Midoriya. Let me teach you how to turn your plague into a panacea. Let me help you become the hero you were always meant to be. Izuku stared at the outstretched hand. It was bare. No gloves. No hazmat suits. Just a human hand, offering a lifeline. Tears welled up in Izuku's eyes, hot and fast, spilling over his cheeks. The walls he had built around his heart, the heavy, suffocating locks he had placed on his soul, finally broke. Slowly, his hand trembling, Izuku reached out. He grasped Professor Xavier's hand. It was warm. Okay, Izuku whispered into the darkness. Okay. I'll go with you. The sleek, matte black fuselage of the X-Jet, known affectionately to its pilots as the Blackbird, rested silently within the cavernous shell of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Muzudafu. Its cloaking technology rendered it nearly invisible from the outside, a ghost ship waiting in the dark. Inside the jet's illuminated cargo bay, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the filthy, rain-slicked alleyway Izuku had been huddled in just an hour prior. The air here smelled of sterilized metal, ozone, and the faint, lingering scent of Logan's cheap cigars. Izuku sat on a padded bench against the bulkhead, his knees pulled up to his chest. He had been given a clean, oversized gray hoodie to replace his torn, sludge-ruined school jacket, and a fresh medical mask covered his face. He watched with wide, shell-shocked eyes as Logan moved about the cabin, casually flipping switches and prepping the jet for departure, seemingly entirely unconcerned that he was sharing a confined space with a boy who had just paralyzed 3 pro-heroes. Professor Xavier sat across from Izuku, his wheelchair locked into the floor grates. The elderly man's presence was a soothing balm against the chaotic spikes of Izuku's anxiety. There was a gentle, psychic pressure in the room, not an intrusion, but a subtle broadcast of calm and safety that Xavier was radiating to keep the boy's heart rate steady. "You're safe now, Izuku," Xavier said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the jet's engines. "The local authorities have cordoned off the overpass, but they are searching blindly. They do not have the resources to track a cloaked supersonic aircraft." Izuku swallowed hard, his gloved hands twisting the fabric of his new hoodie. I don't understand any of this. Why did you come to Japan? How did you know where I was? How did you know what I was? Xavier steepled his fingers, his expression turning solemn. "To understand how we found you, you must first understand the world you live in, Izuku. Not the world the media portrays, but the reality beneath it. In this era, society celebrates the extraordinary. They have categorized superhuman abilities under the neat, marketable umbrella of quirks. But genetics is rarely so neat." Xavier leaned forward. Before the dawn of pro-heroes, there was the X gene. A localized, profound mutation in human DNA. While quirks generally follow a predictable lineage, a child inheriting fire breath from a father or telekinesis from a mother, the X gene is wildly unpredictable. It activates during puberty or moments of extreme trauma. It alters the body, the mind, and the very fabric of a person's existence. Society fears mutants because we cannot be controlled, predicted, or easily commercialized. Izuku's mind raced, his analytical habits kicking in despite his trauma. "So, you're saying my quirk isn't a quirk at all? It's a mutation?" "Precisely," Xavier nodded. "The Japanese government, like many others, maintains a secret registry. When a child manifests an ability that defies standard quirk categorization, especially abilities that are highly destructive, biologically altering, or contagious, an algorithm flags them. They are quietly monitored, labeled as potential biothreats." "The government was watching me?" Izuku asked, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Logan scoffed from the cockpit, leaning back in the pilot's chair. "Watching you, assessing you, and waiting for you to screw up, kid. The minute you sneezed in the wrong direction, they were gonna sweep you under the rug. Toss you in a deep, dark hole where you couldn't scare the public. They don't want a pro-hero who fights with sickness. It's bad for the brand." Izuku looked down at his lap. Logan's harsh words only confirmed everything Bakugo had ever screamed at him, everything the teachers had whispered behind his back. "I possess a unique ability of my own," Xavier continued softly. "I am a telepath, Izuku. I can connect with the minds of others across vast distances. Using a machine I built called Cerebro, I monitor the globe for the emergence of new mutant signatures. I felt your presence years ago, when your power first manifested at that playground." Izuku flinched, remembering the hazmat suits, the screaming children, his mother's tears. "Then, why didn't you come for me then?" "Because you were a child," Xavier said, his eyes filled with profound regret. I do not steal children from their families unless they are in immediate, life-threatening danger. I watched over you. I hope that society would be kind. I hope that your mother's love would be enough to shelter you. But tonight, when your powers surged to save your life, the government's algorithms flagged you as an active terrorist threat. The containment teams dispatched to your location were not armed with handcuffs, Izuku. They were armed with lethal force. The memory of the shotgun firing the rubber bullet, a warning shot that could have easily been a real one, flashed behind Izuku's eyes. He trembled. I saw the trajectory of your life ending in that alleyway, Xavier said quietly. And I saw into your heart. I saw a boy who spends his nights studying biology, dreaming of creating cures. I saw a boy who analyzes heroes because he desperately wants to be one. You have a heroic heart, Izuku Midoriya. It would be a crime against humanity to let that heart stop beating in a dirty alley. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to fight back fresh tears. For 10 years, he had been told he was a villain in waiting. To hear this man, this stranger, speak of his dreams with such absolute validation broke something heavy and restrictive inside his chest. What happens now? Izuku whispered. Now, Logan said, standing up and walking back to the cargo bay, pulling a lever on the wall. We go tell your mom you're leaving. The Midoriya apartment was suffocatingly quiet. Izuku stood in the hallway outside his front door, staring at the brass numbers. He had taken this exact walk thousands of times, but tonight, it felt like a march to the executioner. Behind him, Logan stood with his arms crossed, a silent, imposing guardian. Professor Xavier floated gently in his hover chair, his face a mask of serene calm. She's awake, Xavier murmured softly. She is terrified. She is watching the news. Izuku felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out and turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Mom? Izuku called out, his voice cracking. There was a crash from the living room, the sound of a ceramic mug shattering on the floor. A moment later, Inko Midoriya rounded the corner. Her hair was a messy, frantic halo, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She froze when she saw Izuku, taking in the oversized gray hoodie, the missing school uniform, and the two strange men flanking him. Izuku! She shrieked, rushing forward. But she stopped. Even now, amidst the terror of the night, her conditioning held. She stopped 3 feet away from him, her hands hovering in the air, terrified to touch her own son in case his stress had compromised his viral locks. It was the most heartbreaking thing Logan had ever seen, and the immortal mutant had seen a lot of heartbreak. Mom, I'm so sorry, Izuku choked out, stepping back instinctively to protect her. I didn't mean to. The sludge villain, he attacked me, he was suffocating me, and I panicked, and the mist just came out. I know, baby, I know, I saw it on the news, Inko sobbed, her hands covering her mouth. They're calling you a terrorist, Izuku. The police came here 10 minutes ago. They tore your room apart. They told me if you contacted me, I had to turn you in, or they would arrest me too. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. They searched my room, Mrs. Midoriya, Xavier spoke up, his voice radiating a gentle, psychic warmth that instantly lowered the frantic, panicked energy in the cramped hallway. Inko looked at the man in the wheelchair, her eyes widening as a sudden sense of peace washed over her racing heart. Who are you? Inko breathed. I am a teacher, Xavier said. My name is Charles Xavier. And I run a school in America for gifted young people. People like Izuku. Inko looked between Xavier, Logan, and her son. America? But the police. The authorities in this country view your son as a weapon, Xavier said, his tone gentle but firm. If he stays here, they will hunt him down. They will place him in a facility, and they will never let him go. You know this to be true, Mrs. Midoriya. You have lived in fear of this exact night since he was 4 years old. Inko broke down, falling to her knees on the tatami mat floor. She sobbed, deep, agonizing wails of a mother realizing her absolute worst nightmare had come to pass. Izuku dropped to his knees in front of her, keeping his distance, crying with her. I can't protect him, Inko wailed, hitting her fists against the floor. I tried. I made him wear the masks, I washed his clothes in bleach, I told him to hide. I tried to protect him, but I can't. You did everything you could, ma'am, Logan said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. You kept him alive this long. But he can't hide anymore. He needs to learn how to control it, not just bottle it up. Xavier moved his chair closer to Inko. If you allow him to come with us, he will be safe. My institute is a sanctuary. He will be surrounded by peers who understand his struggles. He will be taught by brilliant minds who will help him master his biology. He will not be a prisoner, Inko. He will be a student. Inko looked up, her tear-stained face trembling. She looked at Izuku. She saw the terror in his green eyes, but she also saw something else. For the first time in years, the dead, resigned look that usually clouded his gaze was gone. There was a flicker of hope. Will I ever see him again? She asked, her voice a fragile whisper. When he is ready, Xavier promised. When he has mastered his gifts, and when the world is ready to see him for the hero he is. You have my word. Inko closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. She had spent a decade treating her son like glass that could shatter into poison at any moment. She loved him more than life itself, and because she loved him, she knew she had to let him go. She opened her eyes and did something she hadn't done since Izuku was a toddler. She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder. Izuku stiffened, panic flaring. Mom! Don't! I'm not sterile. I've been running, I could be shedding. I don't care, Inko cried, holding him tighter, her tears soaking into the fabric of his hoodie. I don't care, Izuku. You're my baby. You're my good boy. Izuku's hands hovered for a moment before he slowly, tentatively, wrapped his arms around his mother's shaking frame. He buried his masked face into her shoulder and wept. He held on to her as if she were the only anchor tethering him to the earth, memorizing the smell of her lavender laundry detergent, the warmth of her embrace. I love you, Mom, he whispered fiercely. I'll make you proud. I promise I'll become a hero. I'll figure this out. Just be safe, my little green bean, Inko whispered back, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Just live. She pulled away, wiping her eyes, and looked up at Logan and Xavier. Take him. Please. Before the police come back. Logan nodded, placing a heavy, reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. We got him, ma'am. Nobody's gonna lay a finger on him. 10 minutes later, Izuku stood in the cargo bay of the Blackbird, watching through a small reinforced window as the lights of his hometown shrank into the distance. The supersonic jets roared to life, pushing him back into his seat as the aircraft breached the upper atmosphere, leaving Japan, his mother, and his old life behind in the dark. The flight to New York took mere hours in the advanced X-jet, but to Izuku, it felt like a lifetime. As the sun began to rise over the Pacific, painting the clouds in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Izuku couldn't help but stare out the window. He was exhausted, having been awake for over 24 hours, but his mind refused to shut down. He pulled out his phone, staring at the shattered screen. Before they left the atmosphere, he had seen the trending news articles. Bioterrorism in Muzidafu, pro-heroes paralyzed. Alder, a student identified as walking plague. Warrant issued for Izuku Midoriya. He turned the phone off. The world hated him. But in this metal tube, hurtling across the globe at Mach 3, he felt surprisingly safe. Drink this. Izuku blinked, snapping out of his thoughts. Logan was standing in front of him, holding out a can of ginger ale. Izuku stared at the can, then at Logan's bare hand. I can't take my mask off to drink, Izuku mumbled. The cabin pressure, the recirculated air. If I exhale pathogens into the ventilation system, I could infect both of you. Logan rolled his eyes, popping the tab on the soda and shoving it into Izuku's gloved hand. Kid, we've got HEPA filters on this bird that can scrub weaponized anthrax out of the air in 3 seconds flat. And like I told you, I heal faster than your bugs can bite. The professor is sitting in a psychic bubble right now meditating. You ain't gonna hurt us. Pull the damn mask down and take a sip. You look like you're gonna pass out. Izuku hesitated. It went against a decade of conditioning. But his throat was parched, and the gentle, unbothered look on Logan's face gave him the courage he needed. He hooked a finger under his mask and pulled it down to his chin. He took a long, desperate swig of the ginger ale. The carbonation burned wonderfully on the way down. Thanks, Izuku whispered. Logan grunted, sitting down on the bench across from him. You analyze things, right? The professor said you like to study powers. Izuku's eyes lit up slightly. Yes, sir. I had notebooks. Well, they got destroyed. But I've studied hundreds of pro heroes. I look at their quirk mechanics, their limitations, how they adapt to environments. Good, Logan said. Keep doing that. But you're gonna have to shift your perspective. Heroes fight bank robbers and megalomaniacs. X-Men fight to keep our species from going extinct. The kids you're gonna meet at the school? They ain't trying to get brand deals or make the top 10 Billboard charts. They're trying to learn how to walk down the street without the world throwing rocks at them. You understand the difference? Izuku thought of Bakugo, obsessed with being the number one hero, obsessed with victory and adoration. Then he thought of the sludge villain, and how quickly the public would turn on anyone who didn't fit the perfect, shiny mold of heroism. Yes, Izuku said, pulling his mask back up over his nose. I think I do. Good, Logan smirked, standing back up and heading for the cockpit. Strap in, kid. We're on final approach. Izuku leaned over to the window. Beneath them, the sprawling concrete jungle of New York City gave way to the lush, green, heavily wooded landscapes of Westchester County. The jet descended rapidly, banking over a massive, pristine lake. As they cleared the tree line, Izuku gasped. Sitting in the middle of a massive, manicured estate was a sprawling, classical mansion. It looked like a palace from a history textbook, constructed of red brick and pale stone, with towering chimneys and sprawling wings. It was beautiful, serene, and entirely unassuming. The X-jet didn't aim for a runway. Instead, it hovered over the mansion's vast back lawn. Slowly, silently, the basketball court on the lawn split down the middle, the ground retracting to reveal a massive, illuminated underground hangar. The jet descended into the earth, the doors sliding shut above them, plunging them into the high-tech underbelly of the Xavier Institute. When the ramp lowered, Izuku stepped out, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. The hangar was vast, filled with mechanics, specialized vehicles, and the hum of advanced servers. It looked more like a military black site than a school. Welcome to the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters, Xavier said, hovering down the ramp beside him. Let us get you settled. They took a sleek glass elevator up from the subterranean levels. As the doors opened onto the ground floor, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Gone was the sterilized metal of the hangar. In its place were rich mahogany walls, plush carpets, antique oil paintings, and the warm, golden light of the morning sun streaming through massive bay windows. It sounded like a school. From down the hall, Izuku could hear the distinct sound of teenagers laughing, lockers slamming, and footsteps thundering down wooden staircases. I've arranged a private room for you in the East Wing, Xavier said, guiding Izuku down the hall. We understand your need for medical isolation until you feel comfortable. Your room is equipped with a negative pressure ventilation system and an adjoining sterilization unit. Izuku felt a wave of profound gratitude. They weren't forcing him to integrate immediately. They were accommodating his needs. They understood. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a group of teenagers. Whoa, sorry, Professor. A tall boy with immaculately styled brown hair stopped dead in his tracks. Izuku immediately noticed the strange, bulky visor covering the boy's eyes. It was made of red quartz, glowing faintly from behind. It is quite all right, Scott, Xavier smiled warmly. I would like you to meet our newest student. This is Izuku Midoriya. He has just arrived from Japan. Izuku, this is Scott Summers. He is one of our senior students and team leaders. Scott stepped forward, offering a firm, confident hand. Izuku instinctually took a half step back, his eyes darting to Scott's bare hand, then to his own gloved ones. Scott noticed the hesitation. He lowered his hand smoothly, offering a polite nod instead. Nice to meet you, Izuku. Don't mind the shades. My mutation is an optical blast. My eyes constantly emit a highly destructive concussive force. This visor is made of ruby quartz. It's the only material that can contain the energy. Without it, I'd blow the roof off this place just by opening my eyes. Izuku stared. Scott wasn't hiding it. He spoke about his highly destructive, potentially lethal power as casually as discussing the weather. And his visor, it was a containment unit. Just like Izuku's mask. just like his gloves. He understands, Izuku thought, a sense of wonder washing over him. He has to lock his power away just like I do. It's an honor to meet you, Scott, Izuku managed to say through his mask. Oh, don't mind fearless leader, he's always so stiff, a melodic, teasing voice chimed in. A girl with stunning, fiery red hair stepped up next to Scott. She smiled at Izuku, and suddenly Izuku felt a warm, golden sensation in the back of his mind. Welcome to the mansion, Izuku, a voice echoed directly into his thoughts. I'm Jean. Jean Grey, Izuku gasped, his hands flying to his head. Sorry, Jean laughed aloud, tapping her own temple. Telepathy and telekinesis. I didn't mean to startle you. The professor told us you've had a really rough couple of days. We're glad you're here. You're safe now. Before Izuku could respond, there was a sudden BMF sound, accompanied by a cloud of purple smoke that smelled faintly of sulfur. Hanging upside down from the chandelier above them was a boy unlike anyone Izuku had ever seen. His skin was a deep, velvety indigo. He had pointed ears, 3 fingers on each hand, and a long, prehensile tail tipped with a spade that swished casually through the air. He wore a dark red and black uniform and had a massive, fanged grin on his face. Most people in Muzidifa would have screamed. Heteromorphic quirks were common, but ones that looked distinctly demonic were often met with prejudice. But Izuku wasn't most people. His eyes widened, his mind instantly racing with questions. Spatial displacement teleportation? Izuku blurted out, stepping forward, his fear momentarily entirely eclipsed by his fanboy nature. Are you traveling through a localized pocket dimension? Does the smoke act as a molecular lubricant, or is it a byproduct of the atmospheric displacement? And your tail, is it fully prehensile, offering enhanced spatial balance? The blue boy blinked in surprise, then burst into a rich, booming laugh. He dropped from the chandelier, landing perfectly on his feet without making a sound. I like this one. The boy cheered with a thick German accent. He gave a theatrical bow. Kurt Wagner, at your service. And yes, my friend, my tail is quite handy. As for the teleportation, it is indeed a jaunt through a brimstone dimension. Very astute. Izuku blushed furiously beneath his mask. I'm sorry, I mumble when I analyze things. My name is Izuku. Well, Izuku, it is a pleasure, Kurt smiled. He didn't look at Izuku with fear. He looked at him with genuine camaraderie. Alright, give the new guy some space, y'all are gonna smother him. The final member of the group stepped forward, leaning against the wall with an aura of detached coolness. She was a girl about Izuku's age, wearing a leather jacket and a green headband. What caught Izuku's attention, however, were 2 things. First, the stark white streak running through the front of her auburn hair. Second, she was covered from head to toe. She wore a turtleneck, heavy denim jeans, and most notably, thick leather gloves. She caught Izuku staring at her hands. Instead of getting defensive, she offered a small, knowing smirk. I'm Rogue, she said, her voice dripping with a thick Mississippi drawl. She crossed her arms. And before you start analyzing, my mutation is skin-to-skin contact. If I touch you, I absorb your life force, your memories, and your powers. Hold on too long, and I'd put you in a coma permanently. So, no handshakes. Izuku stood frozen. He looked at Rogue. He looked at the leather gloves she wore like armor. She was terrified of touching people, because to touch was to hurt. She lived in the exact same prison he did. My quirk is pathogen, Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly, but louder than he had spoken in years. My body synthesizes and manipulates viruses. If I lose control, I can create biological outbreaks. I wear the mask and the gloves so I don't accidentally infect anyone. Rogue's smirk softened into a look of profound, silent understanding. She uncrossed her arms and tipped an imaginary hat to him. Well then, Izuku. Looks like you and I are gonna get along just fine in the no-touching club. Izuku felt a tear slip down his cheek, absorbed instantly by the fabric of his mask. He wasn't a monster here. He wasn't patient zero. He was just Izuku. And he was surrounded by people who were just like him. I believe introductions will have to wait for the grand tour, Xavier interrupted kindly. Izuku needs to get settled, and I have someone very eager to meet him in the medical wing. Ooh, good luck with Dr. McCoy, Scott chuckled. He's been buzzing around all morning like a kid on Christmas. Saying his goodbyes to the junior team, Izuku followed Xavier back to the elevator. They descended past the ground floor, past the hangar, down into the deepest, most secure sublevels of the mansion. The doors opened to a state-of-the-art medical and biological research facility. The room was massive, filled with gleaming stainless steel, holographic displays of DNA helixes, and rows of pristine medical bays. Standing in the center of the room, hunched over a microscope, was a figure that made Izuku stop dead in his tracks. He was a giant. Easily over 6 feet tall and incredibly broad, but that wasn't what was shocking. The man was covered head to toe in thick, bright blue fur. He had oversized hands and feet, and a face that looked remarkably feline. He wore a white lab coat over a button-down shirt, and half-moon spectacles perched on his broad nose. He looked like a monster from a fairy tale. But when he looked up from his microscope, his eyes were bright, warm, and sparkling with undeniable genius. Ah! The hour of arrival is upon us! The blue giant exclaimed, his voice remarkably eloquent, sounding like a tenured Oxford professor. He hurried over, moving with shocking, simian grace, extending a massive, furry hand before abruptly pulling it back. Oh, apologies, apologies. I forgot the protocols. No physical contact, the man chuckled, pushing his glasses up his nose. Welcome, Mr. Midoriya. I am Dr. Henry McCoy. But please call me Hank, or Beast, whichever you prefer. I am the resident physician, geneticist, and chief science officer here at the Institute. It's an honor to meet you, Dr. McCoy, Izuku said, still staring at the blue fur. Hank noticed the stare and laughed, a booming, jolly sound. Fascinating, isn't it? A secondary mutation. I possessed heightened strength and agility since birth, but an experiment of my own design triggered a radical physiological transformation. A cautionary tale of hubris, to be sure, but one learns to embrace the aesthetic. Hank rubbed his hands together excitedly. But enough about me. Charles has sent me your preliminary files, Izuku, and I must say, I am absolutely astounded. A biological bioreactor? The localized, instantaneous manipulation of RNA structures. It's breathtaking. The sheer metabolic control your body must possess to not consume itself is nothing short of a biological miracle. Izuku blinked. A miracle? But it's dangerous. I paralyze people. Nonsense. Hank waved a massive, dismissive hand. A scalpel is dangerous if you drop it on your foot, my boy. But in the hands of a surgeon, it saves lives. Your mutation isn't a curse. It is an untamed symphony. The public fears viruses because they only associate them with sickness. But what is a virus, fundamentally? It is a biological delivery system, a microscopic key that can unlock cellular doors. Hank leaned in close, his eyes wide with enthusiasm. Imagine, Izuku. If we can map your viral strains, if we can teach you how to consciously code the RNA, you could create bacteriophages that hunt down tumors. You could synthesize retroviruses that repair damaged tissue in seconds. You could become the greatest healer the world has ever seen. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Professor Xavier, who was smiling softly. He looked at Hank, who wasn't wearing a hazmat suit, who wasn't standing behind bulletproof glass, who was looking at him not as a biohazard, but as a scientific marvel. For the first time in his 15 years of life, Izuku Midoriya took a deep breath, and he didn't feel like a disease. Izuku stammered, pulling his mask down entirely, exposing his face to the air of the lab. I want to do that. I want to learn. Splendid. Hank clapped his massive hands together, the sound echoing through the lab. Then we have not a moment to lose. I've prepared a sterile isolation room for your initial blood draw. Don't worry, the needles are very small. Let us begin unraveling the magnificent mystery of your genetics, Mr. Midoriya. As Izuku followed Beast into the observation room, he felt the heavy, crushing weight of his past begin to lift off his shoulders. He was far from home. He was in a strange country, surrounded by people with strange, terrifying powers. But as he rolled up his sleeve and offered his arm to the blue giant, Izuku realized something profound. He was finally exactly where he belonged. The first 2 weeks at the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters felt to Izuku Midoriya like holding his breath underwater while surrounded by people breathing freely. His bedroom in the East Wing was a marvel of engineering. Designed by Dr. Hank McCoy, it looked like a cozy, slightly oversized dorm room, complete with a plush bed, a mahogany desk, and a window overlooking the lush, rolling hills of Westchester. But behind the drywall hummed a state-of-the-art negative pressure ventilation system. HEPA filters and UVC scrubbers lined the air ducts, ensuring that not a single microbial organism could escape the room without being entirely incinerated. Izuku appreciated the science, but more than that, he appreciated the safety. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to sleep in a surgical mask. He didn't have to wake up in a cold sweat, terrified that a nightmare had spiked his heart rate and triggered a localized epidemic in his sleep. In this room, he was contained. In this room, he was safe. But stepping out of the room was another story entirely. Izuku stood in front of his mirror, pulling the straps of his black N95 mask over his ears. He pinched the metal wire over the bridge of his nose, ensuring a perfect seal, and snapped his black nitro gloves over his wrists. He tugged the sleeves of his standard-issue Xavier Institute uniform, a dark blue sweater and gray slacks, down to meet the rubber. He stared at his reflection. His green hair was an untamed mess, his eyes wide and anxious above the rim of the mask. The mansion was filled with incredible people. Scott Summers, who contained enough concussive force behind his eyes to level a mountain. Jean Grey, who could juggle cars with her mind. Kurt Wagner, who looked like a demon but had the soul of an angel. Rogue, who wore gloves just like Izuku, terrified of her own touch. They accepted him. They didn't look at him with the disguised horror his teachers in Japan had, or the outright disgust of Bakugo. They invited him to sit with them in the cafeteria, they joked with him in the halls, and they treated him like a peer. But the trauma of 10 years of isolation doesn't vanish in a fortnight. Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that he was a live grenade sitting in a room full of people who didn't realize the pin had already been pulled. Taking a deep, calculated breath, Izuku opened his bedroom door and stepped out into the bustling hallway. "Morning, Izuku." Izuku jumped slightly. Kurt was hanging upside down from the doorframe across the hall, his spade-tipped tail casually flicking back and forth. The blue mutant dropped to the floor with a fluid, acrobatic grace, grinning widely. "And morning, Kurt," Izuku stammered, his voice muffled. He instinctively took a half-step back, maintaining a strict 3-foot radius. Kurt noticed the step back, but his smile never wavered. "Are you ready for History of Mutant Kind? Professor Monroe is lecturing on the Magneto hearings of the 1980s today. Fascinating stuff, though I suspect you've already read the entire textbook twice." Izuku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Actually, I read it 3 times. The socio-political ramifications of the Mutant Registration Acts in America are wildly different from the Quirk registry laws in Japan. In Japan, society commercialized the powers to control them. Here, they tried to legislate them out of existence. It's a completely different paradigm of systemic prejudice." Kurt laughed, slinging an arm through the air, careful not to touch Izuku. "You and Hank are going to talk each other to death one day, I swear it. Come on, let's head down before Scott starts handing out demerits for tardiness." Classes at the Institute were a bizarre hybrid of a standard high school curriculum and a specialized paramilitary academy. Morning classes consisted of calculus, literature, and history, but in the afternoons, the curriculum shifted dramatically. There were classes on mutant ethics, emergency triage, physics as applied to kinetic energy manipulation, and for a select few, tactical combat. Izuku sat in the back of Professor Aurora Monroe's history class, taking meticulous notes. Monroe, also known as Storm, was a striking woman with flowing white hair and eyes that occasionally crackled with atmospheric electricity. She spoke with a regal, commanding presence, detailing the long, bloody history of mutant rights. Izuku found himself fascinated, but deeply unsettled. In Japan, if you had a weak or normal quirk, you were just a civilian. If you had a strong quirk, you went to a hero school like UA. But here, the X-gene didn't care about heroics. It was about survival. The X-Men weren't just a hero agency trying to climb Billboard rankings. They were a strike force dedicated to protecting a hated minority from extinction. It was a heavier burden than Izuku had ever anticipated. And today, he was going to feel the weight of it firsthand. When the final bell of the morning rang, Scott Summers stood up at the front of the class, tapping his ruby quartz visor. "All right, junior team. Suit up. Danger room in 20 minutes. Professor X wants to run a full squad diagnostic." A collective groan rippled through the room from Kurt and a boy named Bobby, but Izuku's stomach plummeted to his shoes. The danger room. He had heard the others talk about it in hushed, reverent tones. It was a massive, subterranean training facility utilizing highly advanced Shi'ar hard light holographic technology and adaptive robotics. It could simulate any environment, any enemy, and any disaster with lethal accuracy. Izuku hadn't used his quirk since the alleyway in Muzurifu. He had kept his internal biological factories locked down so tightly that he occasionally gave himself migraines. The thought of deliberately opening those floodgates, of purposefully synthesizing a virus in a room full of his new friends. "I can't," Izuku thought, panic rising in his throat. "If I miscalculate, if my heart rate spikes too high, I'll infect them all. I could paralyze them. I could kill them." "Hey!" Izuku blinked, snapping out of his spiral. Rogue was standing next to his desk. She was wearing her standard leather jacket, a green bandana, and her thick gloves. She looked down at him with a gaze that saw entirely through his panic. "Breathe, Green Bean," Rogue said softly, using the nickname she had picked up from hearing about his mother. "It's just a simulation. The safeties are on. Nobody's gonna get hurt." "You don't understand, Rogue," Izuku whispered frantically. "My quirk, it isn't like Scott's optic blasts or Jean's telekinesis. I can't just aim it. It's biological. It's airborne. If I release a pathogen, it doesn't know who is friend and who is foe. It just infects." Rogue leaned against the desk, crossing her arms. "And if I take my gloves off and accidentally brush against you, I could put you in a coma. We all got demons in our DNA, Izuku. But if we don't learn how to control them in the danger room, we're gonna kill someone in the real world. You gotta trust yourself." She tapped her leather-clad knuckles against his desk and walked out of the room. Izuku stared after her, his hands trembling. He looked down at his own black nitrile gloves. Trust yourself. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked him to do. The danger room observation deck was bathed in a cool, blue light. Professor Xavier sat in his wheelchair, gazing down through the massive blast-proof windows at the metallic, grid-lined cavern below. Standing beside him was Logan, chewing on an unlit cigar, his arms crossed over his broad chest. Down in the room, the junior team stood in a loose formation. They were dressed in the Institute's training uniforms, sleek, tactical suits of navy blue and yellow, made of unstable molecules designed to stretch and adapt to mutant powers. Izuku stood at the rear of the formation. His suit had been heavily modified by Beast. Instead of a standard collar, the suit featured an airtight, filtered rebreather mask that covered his nose and mouth, hooked into a localized oxygen supply. His gauntlets were sealed to his sleeves, and the fabric of his suit was lined with microscopic biometric sensors monitoring his heart rate, body temperature, and adrenaline levels in real time, feeding the data directly to Beast's lab. He felt like an astronaut about to step onto a hostile alien world. "All right, team, listen up," Scott's voice echoed through the comms in their earpieces. He stood at the front, his red visor gleaming. "This is a basic urban pacification scenario. The simulation will generate a city block populated by civilian holograms and multiple hostile combatants. Objective: neutralize the hostiles, minimize civilian casualties, and maintain perimeter control. Jean, you have Overwatch. Kurt, extraction and flanking. Rogue, heavy hitting. Izuku." Scott paused, turning to look at the trembling boy in the back. "Izuku, you're on crowd control and debuffing. If we get swarmed, we need you to deploy a localized, non-lethal paralytic to slow them down, just like we talked about." "See, copy that, Scott," Izuku squeaked, his voice modulating through the rebreather. Initiating simulation, Xavier's voice rang out from the loudspeakers. Scenario: Purifier Ambush. Level 3. Begin. The metallic grid of the danger room vanished. In the blink of an eye, the vast cavern transformed. The smell of hot asphalt and exhaust fumes filled the air. Towering brick buildings, neon signs, and rusted fire escapes materialized around them. The sounds of a bustling city block, honking cars, chattering pedestrians, echoed in Izuku's ears. It was flawlessly, terrifyingly real. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the simulated street. A holographic taxi flipped into the air, bursting into flames. Hostiles inbound! Jean shouted, levitating several feet off the ground, her eyes glowing with a bright, telekinetic pink aura. 3 blocks down. They've got heavy weaponry. From the smoke of the explosion emerged a squad of purifiers, anti-mutant extremists dressed in heavily armored tactical gear, wielding high-tech energy rifles. They weren't just holograms. The danger room used a combination of hard light and physical robotics to give the enemies mass and lethal capability. X-Men, engage! Scott yelled. He reached up, pressing the side of his visor. A brilliant, ruby-red beam of pure concussive force erupted from his eyes, striking a purifier square in the chest and blasting him 30 feet backward into a brick wall. Chaos erupted. Kurt vanished in a puff of brimstone, appearing on a fire escape above the remaining purifiers. He dropped down, using his tail to sweep the legs out from under one enemy while delivering a brutal double kick to another. Rogue flew forward, her superhuman strength tearing a parking meter out of the concrete and swinging it like a baseball bat, shattering the armor of an advancing robot. Izuku stood frozen. The noise, the explosions, the shouting, it instantly transported him back to the overpass in Mizurufu. The smell of burning rubber triggered a sensory flashback of the sludge villain forcing its way down his throat. Heart rate, 120 BPM. Temperature rising, the automated voice of his suit whispered in his ear. Izuku! We've got reinforcements coming from the alleyway to your left. Jean's voice cracked over the comms. I can't hold them all. Shut them down! Izuku snapped his head to the left. 6 heavily armed purifiers were rushing out of the alleyway, raising their rifles toward Jean, who was currently straining to hold up a collapsing piece of masonry to protect a civilian hologram. I need to act, Izuku thought frantically. I need to synthesize a paralytic. Just a mild one. Just enough to stop their motor functions. He closed his eyes and reached inward, feeling for the biological locks in his bone marrow. He commanded his cells to begin the rapid mutation process. He could feel the familiar, feverish heat rising in his blood. The virus was assembling. It was a simple, harmless neuroinhibitor. But as the heat rose, the terror clamped down on his heart. What if I push too hard? What if I synthesize a necrotizing strain by accident? What if the wind shifts and blows it into Jean? I'll paralyze her. I'll drop the rubble on her. I'll kill her. Izuku, now! Scott yelled, firing a blast past Izuku's shoulder to cover him. Izuku looked at the purifiers. He looked at his gloved hands. You're a disease, Deku. You rot things from the inside out. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. With a violent, mental slam, he forced the biological locks shut. He killed the virus inside his own body before it could reach his sweat glands. The fever broke, leaving him gasping and shivering. I can't! Izuku screamed over the comms. I can't do it! Watch out! Rogue yelled. Because Izuku had failed to deploy the crowd control, the purifiers opened fire. A barrage of hard-light energy blasts slammed into Jean's telekinetic shield. The strain was too much. Jean cried out in pain, her shield shattering. The resulting shockwave threw her backward, her head slamming hard against the asphalt. Jean! Scott roared, rushing to her side. The purifiers aimed their rifles at the downed mutants. Simulation terminated, Xavier's voice echoed flatly. The city street flickered and vanished, leaving the team standing in the cold, metallic grid of the danger room. The purifiers dissolved into pixels. There was a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Jean groaned, rubbing the back of her head as Scott helped her sit up. The hard light impact wasn't lethal, but it still hurt like hell. Scott turned to Izuku, his jaw tight. He didn't look angry, just deeply, profoundly frustrated. Midoriya. What happened? You had an open window. You had a clear line of sight. All you had to do was deploy a localized sleep strain. You left Jean completely exposed. Izuku backed away, his hands gripping his own arms, his nails digging into the fabric of his suit. I'm sorry. I couldn't. I didn't want to hurt you. If I lost control of the strain. We were wearing our filters, Izuku, Scott said, his tone commanding but exasperated. Beast designed these suits specifically to withstand your output. But you have to trust the tech, and you have to trust yourself. Out there, in the real world, if you freeze up because you're scared of your own shadow, people die. Scott, back off, he's just a kid, Rogue interjected, walking over and standing between them. She looked at Izuku with sympathy. He panicked. It happens to all of us. We can't afford panic in the field, Rogue, Scott countered. His power is AoE, area of effect. If he can't deploy it reliably, he's a liability to the team. The word hit Izuku like a physical blow. Liability. It was just a polite way of saying monster. Izuku didn't say another word. He turned around, sprinted toward the massive metal blast doors of the danger room, and ran out into the corridor. Up in the observation booth, Xavier sighed, rubbing his temples. He is terrified of his own potential. The psychological conditioning he underwent in Japan is incredibly deep-seated. Logan grunted, taking the cigar out of his mouth. Cyclops is right, though. The kid's got enough firepower in his bloodstream to wipe out an army, but right now, he's got the spine of a jellyfish. You can't put a kid on a battlefield if he thinks his gun is gonna blow up in his own face. He needs guidance, Logan, Xavier said softly. Not tactical reprimands. He needs someone who understands what it means to possess a power that feels like a curse. Logan looked down at the empty danger room floor, then sighed heavily, popping his knuckles. Yeah? I'm going. Keep the blue boy out of my way for 20 minutes. Izuku didn't stop running until he reached the underground hangar. It was quiet here, away from the hum of the mansion and the judgmental eyes of his peers. The sleek blackbird sat dormant in the center of the bay, smelling of jet fuel and cold steel. Izuku scrambled up a metal gantry and tucked himself into a dark corner behind a stack of shipping crates. He pulled his knees to his chest, his breathing ragged beneath his rebreather. He reached up and yanked the mask off his face, tossing it onto the metal grating. He was a failure. He had finally been given the chance to be a hero, to train with a real team, and he had choked. He had let Jean get hurt because he was too cowardly to face his own biology. Maybe they should have locked me up in Tartarus, Izuku thought miserably. Maybe some quirks aren't meant to be saved. Tartarus, huh? From what I hear, the food there is terrible. Izuku gasped, his head snapping up. Logan stepped out from the shadows of the Blackbird. He wasn't wearing an X-Men uniform, just his usual jeans, boots, and a stained white undershirt. He walked slowly up the gantry stairs, his heavy boots echoing on the metal. I didn't say that out loud, did I? Izuku wiped furiously at his eyes. Didn't have to, kid, Logan said, leaning against the railing next to Izuku. He pulled a silver Zippo lighter from his pocket, and finally lit his cigar, taking a long drag. The smell of cheap tobacco filled the air. I've got heightened senses. I can smell the guilt rolling off you from 3 hallways away. Izuku looked away, ashamed. Did Scott send you to kick me off the team? Or did the professor decide I'm too unstable to keep here? Neither, Logan grunted, blowing a ring of smoke toward the ceiling. Slim is a good leader, but he's a Boy Scout. He thinks every problem can be solved with a tactical manual and a pep talk. And Charles is a saint, but he ain't exactly got a lot of experience getting his hands dirty. Logan turned his head, his dark, piercing eyes locking onto Izuku. But me? I know exactly what's going through your head right now, bub. You're sitting here thinking that you're a monster masquerading as a man. You're thinking that the thing inside you is evil, and that if you let it out, you're no better than the villains you read about in your little notebooks. Izuku's breath hitched. It was exactly what he was thinking. Logan sighed, taking the cigar out of his mouth. Watch. With a sudden, wet snick sound, 3 massive, gleaming adamantium claws erupted from the skin between Logan's knuckles. Izuku flinched back against the crates, his eyes wide. He had read about Logan's mutation, but seeing it up close was entirely different. The claws were razor-sharp, brutal, and utterly lethal. Blood dripped slowly from where the metal had torn through Logan's skin, only to instantly stop as his accelerated healing factor knit the flesh back together. "Look at these," Logan said softly, holding his fist up. "What are they?" They're your claws." "Your mutation," Izuku whispered. "Wrong," Logan corrected harshly. "They're knives, kid. 6 foot long, unbreakable butcher knives bolted directly to my skeleton. They ain't meant for building houses. They ain't meant for typing on a computer. They serve one purpose, and one purpose only, cutting flesh and bone. They are designed to kill." Logan lowered his hand, his eyes burning with an ancient, heavy sorrow. "I've lived a long time, Izuku. I've fought in more wars than you have fingers and toes. I've used these claws to carve through thousands of men. Sometimes for the right reasons. Sometimes for the wrong ones. And for a long, long time, I thought that because I had these claws, because I was built to be a killer, that's all I was. A weapon." With another wet snick, the claws retracted back into his hands. The skin sealed over, leaving no trace they had ever been there. "But Charles taught me something," Logan continued, sitting down on a crate opposite Izuku. "A weapon is just a piece of metal, kid. A virus is just a string of RNA. They ain't got morals. They ain't got a soul. A weapon is just a tool. It's the guy holding it who decides if it saves a life or takes one." Izuku stared at the gruff man, his mind reeling. "But my quirk, it's a disease, Logan. It makes people sick." "How do you save a life with a disease?" "By being smarter than it." Logan tapped his own temple. "You think you're the only mutant who has to hold back? When Scott takes off his glasses, he levels buildings. When Jean loses her temper, she can rip the atmosphere apart. They don't freeze up because they're afraid of their power. They fight with it, because they trust their own minds to control it." Logan leaned forward, pointing a callous finger at Izuku's chest. "You spent 10 years in Japan letting society tell you what your power was. They called it a plague, so you believed it was a plague. But you're in the big leagues now, kid. You're in a house full of gods and monsters, and we don't give a damn what society thinks. So I'm gonna ask you one question, and I want an honest answer." Logan paused, his gaze boring into Izuku's soul. "Are you a villain, Izuku Midoriya?" Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. He thought of Bakugo. He thought of the teachers who looked away when he was bullied. He thought of his mother, crying in the hallway because she couldn't protect him. He thought of the heroes he idolized, the ones who threw themselves into danger with a smile. He didn't want to hurt people. He just wanted to stand between the innocent and the fire. "No," Izuku said, his voice trembling but resolute. "No, I'm not a villain." "Then stop acting like one," Logan said flatly, standing up. "Stop acting like you're one bad day away from wiping out a city. Stop being afraid of the gun, and start learning how to aim it. Hank's waiting for you in the med bay. He said something about RNA sequencing. Go do some nerd stuff. And tomorrow? You get back in that danger room, and you show Cyclops what you can really do." Logan turned and walked down the gantry stairs, leaving a trail of cigar smoke in his wake. Izuku sat there for a long moment, staring at his gloved hands. "A weapon is just a tool." He reached down, picked up his rebreather mask, and snapped it firmly over his face. He didn't feel cured of his fear. The anxiety was still there, a tight knot in his stomach, but something fundamental had shifted. The fear was no longer a cage, it was just a hurdle. He stood up, descending the stairs, and headed straight for the medical wing. Dr. Henry McCoy's laboratory was a sanctuary of logic and discovery. While the danger room was a place of stress and violence, the lab was a place of infinite possibility. When Izuku walked through the pneumatic sliding doors, he found Beast hanging upside down from the ceiling by his feet, using a laser scalpel to adjust the wiring on a massive, humming electron microscope. "Ah, Izuku," Hank said cheerily, dropping to the floor with a heavy thud that shook the sterile tiles. He adjusted his half-moon spectacles. "I heard about the danger room simulation. Cyclops can be a bit of a rigid taskmaster, but his heart is in the right place. Are you all right, my boy?" "I'm okay, Dr. McCoy," Izuku said softly, walking over to a stainless steel examination table. I think I've been looking at my quirk all wrong. I've only ever focused on containment. On suppressing the viruses. But if I want to be an X-Man, I need to know how to use them safely. Hank's furry face lit up with a massive, genuinely delighted smile. Now that is the spirit of scientific inquiry. Come here, look at this. Hank practically dragged Izuku over to a massive holographic projector in the center of the room. He tapped a few keys on a keyboard, and a massive, glowing, three-dimensional model of a DNA double helix appeared in the air between them, but interlaced with the human DNA were strange, alien-looking proteins, glowing a toxic green. I've been analyzing the blood samples we took yesterday, Hank explained, his hands moving rapidly over the controls, isolating the green proteins. Your mutation is, frankly, staggering. In a normal human, the immune system produces white blood cells to attack foreign pathogens. But your bone marrow operates like a microscopic bioforge. When you experience adrenaline or conscious intent, your marrow rapidly assembles viral structures, RNA wrapped in protein shells. Hank zoomed in on the hologram. But here is the truly miraculous part, Izuku. The viruses you create are not natural. They are highly complex, synthetic structures. Which means, they are programmable. Izuku stared at the floating molecules, his brilliant mind instantly grasping the implications. Programmable, you mean, like CRISPR? Like genetic editing? Exactly. Hank beamed. In the alleyway in Japan you panicked, so your subconscious forged a blunt instrument, a paralytic designed to shut down human nervous systems. But what if we bypass the subconscious? What if we engage your conscious, analytical mind to design the virus before you synthesize it? Izuku's eyes widened. If I can control the RNA sequencing in my mind, I can dictate exactly what the virus attacks, and what it ignores. Precisely, Hank said, walking over to a secure vault against the wall. He inputted a passcode, and the heavy door hissed open. He reached inside and pulled out a jagged, charred piece of metal. It looked like a piece of robotic armor. This, Hank said, placing the metal on a sterile containment tray in the center of the room, is a piece of a sentinel drone. The purifiers use them to hunt mutants. It is composed of a high-density titanium alloy. Hank pressed a button, and a thick cylinder of bulletproof glass lowered from the ceiling, encasing the metal tray in a vacuum-sealed chamber. Two mechanical Waldo arms extended into the chamber, which Izuku could operate from a control console. Your task, Mr. Midoriya, Hank challenged, crossing his massive arms, is to destroy that metal. But here is the catch. You cannot use an acidic compound that would harm human flesh. You must design a pathogen that is entirely harmless to biological organisms, but absolutely lethal to titanium. Izuku stared at the piece of metal behind the glass. A weapon is just a tool. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to lock his biology away this time. Instead, he reached inward, past the fear, past the trauma, and found the bubbling, dormant factories in his marrow. He visualized a bacteriophage, a virus that looked like a microscopic lunar lander. But instead of programming it to attack cells, he envisioned its target receptors. He pictured the molecular structure of titanium. He visualized a highly aggressive, rapid oxidizing synthetic enzyme, essentially, hyperrust. He bound the enzyme into the viral shell, programming the RNA to seek out and multiply only when in contact with the specific metallic alloy. He felt his internal temperature begin to rise, but this time, he wasn't panicking. He was in control. The heat was focused, deliberate. I have the sequence, Izuku said, opening his eyes. His skin was flushed, a faint green mist beginning to seep from the pores of his hands. Excellent. Route it through the containment port, Hank instructed. Izuku placed his hands into a pair of sensory gloves attached to the console. The gloves linked to the mechanical arms inside the glass chamber. Through a specialized microscopic nozzle attached to the mechanical arms, Izuku channeled the green mist from his own body, isolating the pathogen, and sprayed it directly onto the piece of sentinel armor. For a second, nothing happened. The green mist settled over the dull gray metal like a fine dew. Then, the reaction began. The titanium alloy began to bubble. The gray surface rapidly turned a violent, aggressive shade of burnt orange. A loud, hissing sound echoed through the glass chamber as the metal literally began to rot before their eyes. The structural integrity of the alloy failed catastrophically, the heavy armor plate dissolving into a pile of brittle, rusted dust in less than 30 seconds. Izuku stopped the flow of the pathogen, his breathing heavy. Hank tapped a few buttons, running a spectroscopic analysis on the air inside the chamber. The pathogen is inert. It consumed the titanium, exhausted its fuel source, and died. If a human were to breathe that mist, their body would simply process it as harmless protein. It wouldn't even trigger a sneeze. Izuku stared at the pile of rust. He had done it. He had created a weapon that couldn't hurt people. That was magnificent, Izuku, Hank praised, placing a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. But we are not finished. A hero does not merely destroy his enemies. A hero empowers his allies. Hank walked over to a medical cabinet and pulled out an empty auto-injector syringe. He handed it to Izuku. Your quirk manipulates biology, Hank said, his eyes gleaming with mad scientist glee. Can you synthesize a retrovirus that acts as an adrenaline stimulant? Something that bypasses the adrenal glands and directly injects temporary, hyperoxygenated energy into muscle tissue? A biological buff, if you will? Izuku's mind raced. I think so. It would be dangerous for a normal human. It could cause cardiac arrest. But for a mutant with enhanced physiology, like myself, Hank grinned, gesturing to his massive, muscular blue frame. My cardiovascular system can handle immense strain. Synthesize the booster, Izuku. Put it in the syringe. We are going to test it. Are you sure? Izuku asked, his hands shaking as he took the syringe. If I get the sequence wrong, I could trigger a massive stroke. Science requires a leap of faith, my boy, Hank said, rolling up the sleeve of his lab coat to expose a massive blue bicep. I trust you. Proceed. Izuku took a deep breath. He visualized the adrenal compounds, the oxygen-carrying proteins, and bound them into a harmless retrovirus delivery system. He gripped the syringe tightly, focusing the output of his pores directly into the needle. A moment later, the empty syringe filled with a glowing, pale blue liquid. Izuku held his breath, walking over to Beast. With trembling hands, he pressed the auto-injector against Hank's shoulder and pulled the trigger. The hiss of the injection echoed loudly in the quiet lab. Hank stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then, his eyes widened dramatically. Oh my stars and garters, Hank breathed. The blue giant suddenly flexed, letting out a booming roar that shook the glass beakers on the tables. The muscles in his arms and chest swelled visibly, his veins popping against his blue fur. He moved with a sudden, terrifying blur of speed, leaping backwards 20 feet in a single bound, landing lightly on a heavy steel operating table. To Izuku's shock, Hank grabbed the edges of the solid steel table and, with a massive grunt of effort, bent the thick metal in half as if it were made of cardboard. Hank dropped the ruined table, panting heavily, a massive grin plastered across his feline face. The cellular absorption rate is instantaneous. My strength output just increased by at least 40%. And the neurological clarity. I feel like I've consumed 10 pots of espresso. Izuku, this is revolutionary. You didn't just buff me, you temporarily evolved me. Izuku slumped against the console, laughing. It was a breathless, genuine sound of pure relief and joy. He hadn't poisoned anyone. He hadn't paralyzed anyone. He had made a friend stronger. He wasn't a disease. He was a cure. Later that night, the mansion was quiet. Izuku sat at the mahogany desk in his bedroom. The negative pressure ventilation system hummed softly above him. He was wearing his mask, but only out of habit, not out of fear. He opened a brand new, leather-bound notebook that Professor Xavier had gifted him. He skipped the first page, opting not to title it Hero Analysis for the Future. That was the past. That was the boy who sat in the quarantine zone in Aldera Junior High, wishing he was someone else. On the first blank page, Izuku uncapped his pen and began to write. Strain 01 Titanium Phage. Classification: Targeted environmental hazard. Non-lethal to biology. Strain 02 Adrenoretrovirus, Alpha. Classification: Ally enhancement. Temporary physiological boost. He stared at the words, a deep, profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. He was learning. He was growing. The symptoms of his mutation were no longer uncontrolled outbreaks. They were conscious, calculated tools of heroism. Tomorrow, he would go back to the danger room. And this time, he wouldn't freeze. Izuka closed the notebook, turned off the desk lamp, and climbed into bed. For the first time in his entire life, Izuka Midoriya fell asleep, and he didn't dream of being a monster. He dreamed of being an X-Man,